I don't want just a general answer here that there was a lot of workload and
No,
so
sir.
forth. But what reason was given specifically by the CIA person responsible for putting that name on the watch list as to the failure to do so?
We're not putting the name on the watch list. Our judgment is in talking to everybody working at the time that there were uneven standards, poor training, and we didn't
For
give
that
them.
specific failure? All those reasons for that specific
Yes, sir,
failure?
we did not. Everybody, the people involved, or people who have access, who we've talked to, acknowledge that there were uneven practices, bad training, and a lack of redundancy. The fact that they were swamped does not mitigate the fact that we didn't overcome that with either redundancy, a separate unit, or better training.
Have you identified the person or persons who are responsible to put that name on the watch list?
We know who was working this case.
My question is, though, do you know the name or names of the persons who are responsible for putting those names on the watch list? That's my question.
Yes, sir, I think I have.
All right.
In May of 2000, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar began renting a room in the home of an FBI informational asset. An FBI San Diego special agent, who we call Stan, was the asset's control agent since the asset was opened in 1994. The asset had provided the FBI with a significant amount of information over the years and was considered a reliable source. He was well known in the Muslim community. He often rented rooms in his house to Muslim men in the community who needed temporary housing. At the time that Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar moved in with him, he had two other individuals renting rooms in his house. Khalid al-Mihdhar lived with the asset until June 10th of 2000, when he left the United States, and Nawaf al-Hazmi remained as a boarder at the asset's home until December of 2000. According to Stan, the asset told Stan that two young Saudis who had recently come to the United States to visit and study had moved in as boarders. The asset described them as good Muslims who often went to the mosque and prayed. The asset provided Stan with their first names, but little other identifying information. Stan did not obtain any additional information from the asset about the boarders, such as their last names, and he did not conduct any investigation of them. Had Stan pursued information about Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, he might have uncovered the CIA information about them. In addition, he might have created a record in FBI computer systems about Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar's presence in San Diego, which would have provided the FBI with additional information and avenues of investigation when it began to search for them in August 2001. For these reasons, we examined Stan's actions with regard to the asset. In interviews with the JICI staff and in congressional testimony, Stan stated that the informational asset primarily provided information about the activities and identities of people in the Muslim community in San Diego who were the subjects of FBI preliminary inquiries or full field investigations. Stan said that the asset volunteered some information about other individuals as well. He said he thought that the asset had good judgment about which individuals might pose a threat and that his reporting had been consistent over the years. We reviewed the asset's file and noted the asset provided information on a regular basis on a variety of different individuals and topics. Although we could not evaluate the asset's judgment from the file, we consider Stan's description of the asset's reporting to be apt. Stan also stated that he was aware that the asset had boarders in his house over the years, and the fact that two new boarders had moved in with the asset did not arouse suspicion. He noted that the asset volunteered that the two boarders were living with him soon after they moved in, but the asset provided the information about his boarders as part of a personal conversation and not because the asset believed it had any significance. Stan stated the information provided from the asset was the two boarders were from Saudi Arabia, which, according to Stan, was not a country that the United States had placed on the list as a threat to national security. Stan said that the asset did not describe his boarders as suspicious or otherwise worthy of further scrutiny. He also asserted that he was prohibited from further pursuing the information about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar, including documenting the information that he had obtained because of the Attorney General guidelines in effect at that time. In examining Stan's actions, we first considered whether the Attorney General's FCI guidelines were applicable to the situation involving al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar. As suggested by Stan, the Attorney General's FCI guidelines were designed to ensure that the FBI opened preliminary inquiries and conducted investigations only if the required predicating information was present. Because there was no allegations or information provided to Stan that al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar were terrorists or agents of a foreign power, we agree that Stan did not have sufficient information to open a preliminary inquiry and actively investigate Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. We also considered whether, at a minimum, Stan could have attempted to obtain additional information about people who were living with this informational asset, such as their full names, and whether he was required to document the information on al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar that he had received from his asset. First, we reviewed FBI policies and procedures for handling assets. Those policies did not require Stan to obtain information from an informational asset about people living in the asset's house or to conduct record checks to obtain this information. In addition, the policies do not appear to require Stan to have documented information received from the asset about anyone living with them, or to even document their full identities if he had obtained that information. We also interviewed several FBI agents who were on Stan's counterterrorism squad and asked them whether it would have been their practice to seek additional information about boarders living with an informational asset and what, if anything, they would have done with this information. We found no consensus among them about whether information on boarders like al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar who live with an informational asset should have been obtained and documented. Some agents stated that they would have pursued more information about boarders living with an informational asset, while others stated that they would not have. Some of the agents stated that they would have noted that the fact of the informational asset having boarders in his file. Some agents stated that they would have documented the identities of the roommates in an electronic cable that would have been uploaded to ACS. However, former San Diego Division Special Agent in Charge William Gore told the Office of the Inspector General that he did not believe anything had been done wrong in the handling of the informational asset, and he did not fault Stan for not obtaining the information. While we recognize that no FBI policy addressed this issue, and there was a lack of consensus of what should have been done in a situation like this, we believe that it would have been a better practice for Stan to have questioned the informational asset about his boarders and obtained their full identities. Stan was aware that al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar were relative strangers to the informational asset, and that they were not friends, family, or even long-term associates of the asset. Stan also was aware that the asset had no direct knowledge of al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar's backgrounds and could not vouch for their character. Moreover, the boarders in the asset's home were in a position to put the asset and the information he supplied to the FBI in jeopardy. Therefore, prudence and operational security would suggest that information about persons living with the asset should have been sought, at least to the extent of learning and documenting their names, and perhaps running a records check on them. If Stan had asked more questions about the asset's boarders, he also may have acquired enough information to pursue further inquiry. For example, the asset has stated after the September 11 attacks that al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar did not make telephone calls from his house, and that in retrospect, he found his behavior to be suspicious. The asset also stated after September 11 that he had told al-Hazmi to stay away from Omar al-Bayoumi because of his alleged association with the Saudi government. Therefore, If Stan had asked the asset a few more questions about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar and acquired this information, it would have led Stan to conduct further inquiries, particularly since Omar al-Bayoumi had been the subject of an FBI investigation. Moreover, while no specific FBI policy required agents to obtain information about persons living in a house with an informational asset, FBI policies required control agents to continuously evaluate the credibility of their informational assets. Before informational assets are approved, they are required to undergo a background investigation to assess their sustainability, credibility, and bona fides. Certain minimum checks were required, such as a check of FBI indices, local criminal checks, and CIA traces. The policy provided that additional checks may be deemed necessary, such as querying other assets and running indice checks on immediate family members. In addition, FBI policy provided that an asset's bona fides should be continually addressed, even after the initial assessment was complete. More specifically, the FBI field office is required to conduct a yearly evaluation of each informational asset and provide the evaluation report to FBI headquarters. This report is required to contain, among other things, the FBI's number of contacts with the informational asset during the reporting period, a summary of the most significant information furnished by the informational asset, the number of preliminary inquiries and full investigations that were opened based on information provided by the informational asset, and steps that have been taken to establish asset bona fides since last evaluation. Although Stan would not have been required to obtain additional information about his informational assets borders to complete this report, the FBI's policy of continually vetting the credibility of its asset permitted Stan to seek more information about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar and the other borders from his asset and run indice checks on any persons living with this informational asset. We reviewed the informational assets file, Stan's yearly evaluation of the asset, and Stan's reporting on the bona fides checks concluded on the informational asset. Based on our review, we were concerned by the lack of information included in the file in support of the bona fide checks conducted by Stan each year. In each of the documents provided to FBI headquarters about the informational asset that we reviewed, Stan wrote the following pre-functionary paragraph. Asset bona fides have been established through independently received reliable asset reporting and physical surveillance. Stan maintained no predicating information in the file on these bona fide checks. The file did not disclose which checks and surveillance have been conducted, by whom, when, or the results. Without that material, the informational assets bona fides were merely verified through the attestation of Stan. It is possible that Stan conducted numerous indice checks and conducted an exhaustive bona fide check on the informational asset each year. It also is possible that he conducted minimal or no checks and merely attested to the informational asset's credibility based on their personal history and relationship. Because we were unable to interview Stan, we could not determine which was more likely. However, no FBI policy described the level of detail to be contained in an asset file. We believe the policy should require an asset file to contain at least minimal information to allow a reviewer to independently verify that an adequate background check had been conducted. This information is necessary to allow FBI managers to determine whether the control agent is continuing to assess each informational asset's credibility. This information would have helped ensure that the control agent has not become too comfortable with the informational asset and thus vulnerable to being misled or failing to obtain adequate information about the asset. We also were concerned by the lack of policy or practice specifying what information from the asset must be documented. The al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar case clearly demonstrates that information must be documented to be useful. Even if Stan had obtained the full names of al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar from the informational asset, he would not have been required to document it in any retrievable format. Without the requirement to document such information, the information would not have been accessible to other FBI personnel. For information to be useful, it must be documented in a retrievable form, and it must be available for consideration and analysis. In sum, we believe that al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar's presence in San Diego should have joined some scrutiny from the FBI. Although unknown at this time, documenting their presence in San Diego in a searchable and retrievable manner would have provided an opportunity for the FBI to connect information in the future. If al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar's presence in San Diego in 2000 had been documented, an FBI indices record check in August of 2001, when the FBI received information from the CIA that al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar had entered the United States, might have led the FBI to the San Diego information. This connection would have provided sustainable leads for the New York's FBI's effort to locate al-Mihdhar in August of 2001.